Welcome to the Big Bag. My name's Mark Machado. You might recognise me from the Murray End, and I'm joined by Nick Brookes, franchise cricket's #1 historian. This is a kind of adjacent show to Murray End, and we're going to talk about all the franchise leagues around the cricket world. Around the world, there's no end of leagues. Almost every single country in the world has a league these days, and I think I saw news somewhere that Ireland have got permission. It's their kind of idea for European Super League of franchise cricket got green lit a couple of weeks ago, didn't it? So, like, even small European countries will soon have the opportunity to play or to provide the world with more franchise cricket teams. Let's jump straight into it, though. Before we do that, if you're watching live on YouTube, firstly hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to Cricket Smash. It's the home of the Big Bag. It's the home of Murray End. It's the home of Kumble Corner. We've got lots more other stuff planned for the coming 12 months as well. And do jump in the comments. Leave your thoughts. Leave your views. We love to hear them. We love to see what you guys are thinking. And as always, be kind. Be kind. Nick, the big kind of news where we both are in the UK is that the 100 auction sale of the 100 teams is kind of coming to a head in the next few days, and the story today is, at the point of recording this, is that it sounds like Reliance Group, the Ambani family, have purchased 49% of the Oval Invincibles. Of course, the rest of it, the controlling share, will be owned by Surrey County Cricket Club, which, if you don't know, is the most successful and most financially viable of all the British and English counties. What's your kind of first thought when you heard that the Ambanis were jumping into bed with Surrey?
Oh man, it's two super giants meeting in good old South London down at the Oval. I wasn't surprised. I mean, we've seen Mumbai spreading their wings around the world. We've got Mumbai Cape Town. We've got Mumbai Emirates. We're probably going to have Mumbai Rome in the Italian Super League by 2030. But yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, especially in England, view these sales of 49% stakes of these teams quite negatively. But I think it can only be a good thing. I think you've got to say that the 100 has been mismanaged from start to finish, right? It was a golden opportunity. England had fallen behind in terms of franchise cricket, not having a franchise tournament. But I mean, for me, everything from the 100-ball format to the draft as opposed to the auction to the horrible graphics that they've got on the screen, it's all been a disaster. But there's potentially, sorry, you can probably hear my cat protesting in the background. He doesn't like the 100 either. I think that what owners and investors are looking at is that there's potentially something really good here, right? It's generally the crowds are packed. The ECB has blocked out August as time for the 100. So you've got England players available. There isn't too much competition with other franchise leagues at those times of years. That time of year. So although the 100 has been a disaster through its first few seasons, the raw materials are there to potentially polish a diamond, right? And it'll be interesting to see who comes in for the rest of the franchises. I saw the Lucknow Super Giants owners, as well as the Glazers and Todd Bowley, were all in the market for the Spirit. It seems that the London teams are the most sought after, I guess, because they guarantee packed crowds, right? But yeah, hopefully some outside investors coming in, putting pressure on the ECB and the counties to make this a better league, to make it a T20 cricket league, I think would be a good place to start.
Yeah, when me and you were at the Oval for the England-Sri Lanka test, a game that I should point out Sri Lanka did win, all the talk was of the Croydon Knight Riders, right? That the KKR ownership group, they were kind of eyeing it up at that point. That's obviously not happened. It's interesting because it appears that not all of the IPL owners seem to be interested in taking stakes in various 100 sides. The Lucknow Super Giants being interested in the London Spirit wasn't something I was expecting, only because I think they've only got Lucknow and is it Durban they have as well?
Yeah.
Right? So they're not prolific in buying up franchise teams, but maybe this is the beginning of it. I think it's interesting. The Todd Bowley Glazer connection is interesting, and also have you heard about this group of tech billionaires from Silicon Valley that are quite keen to get involved?
Yeah, I just saw a global tech entrepreneurs as a tag. I didn't see a specific group, but I mean, the MLC in America's had lots of backing from big tech. There's obviously a big South Asian element in Silicon Valley as well. So, I mean, I think that all of that would be great. I think just getting some outside voices in. I mean, another franchise we've seen doing a lot of outreach is the Royals, isn't it? They're in the CPL, they're in the SAT 20. So if they come in for a bid, that'll be something to keep an eye on. I wonder what we're going to get.
Yeah, I'm that's another franchise that it's surprising that they're not kind of front and center of it, because obviously that's fronted by a guy who's a British Indian Londoner, right? I think they're based in West London, the whole operation, and he'll know the Oval quite well. There's a lot. It's mainly English people who work there. They know the market quite well. I wonder if that's also a bit of a sign, maybe, that if they aren't interested, they might well be that actually they've looked at it and thought, it's not really one for me, because I do think the 49% thing is quite strange and quite weird, because I mean, if you're a billionaire, you're rich, not stupid, right? So you don't want to be putting your money into something that you don't have a controlling stake over. I mean, some people will say, I think the Ambanis are reported to be putting in 140 million for 49% of the Oval and Oval Invincibles, and you're like, well, for them that's not a huge amount of money, but I know if you look at it on some level that's true, but you just don't, regardless of how rich you are, I don't think you drop 140 million on something and go, it's fine. It's not a takeaway that's gone wrong on a Friday night, right? That you can kind of write off. It's a hell of a lot of money, and also for a lot of these people, I think their brand. I mean, will they let the Oval Invincibles be renamed MI Oval or MI South London? Or
yeah, I mean, I would have thought that people in Surrey fans, Oval Invincible fans, would have would have issues with them being the Mumbai Indians Invincibles. The London Supergiants sounds a bit better to me. But yeah, you're right to say, Marky, I'm no expert when it comes to contracts and business deals, but 49% is a very specific number, isn't it? And the clear permutations are that it's not a controlling stake. So how much input and influence these investors are going to have, they certainly won't be able to dictate terms, you'd have thought, to the ECB and the counties. So, look, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think there's a general acceptance that the 100 hasn't gone the way that those in charge of it would have liked it to go. I think financially it hasn't been a huge success. As you can hear, my cat agrees. He hates the 100 and he's just going to go on his way. So, yeah, I mean, change is afoot, isn't it, in this league? And I think that can only be a good thing. And it's definitely one to watch over the coming months and the next couple of years to come, to see where this league moves to, whether it can progress to being a major global force in the franchise scene, because I think the potential is there. You know, England's got a good bank of players, but at the moment it's just not functioning as it should be.
It's interesting, because if someone put me in charge for it, or if I had a stake in it, I'd be pushing to try and make it more for T20 League, right? So I think the first thing you could do is kind of go, actually, do you know what? I'm not sure if the 100, we need to keep playing 100 balls. Actually, there's millions of people all around the globe who are much used to watching kind of a more traditional form of T20 cricket. I mean, it's crazy even thinking that there's a kind of newer reformat of the game when you think about it. It's like going around to someone's house at Christmas discovering they play Monopoly with totally different rules, but it's still the same game, isn't it?
I do think it was a bizarre idea in the first place. I've heard rumors that the idea was for it to more comfortably fit into a 3-hour time slot for terrestrial TV. But I think what's fair to say is that the organizers, when they planned 100 balls, I don't think could have predicted the full consequences. And my opinion is that 100 balls just doesn't work as well as 120. When you lose wickets early, it doesn't really give sufficient time to rebuild. I don't know, for our viewers in the UK, it's a bit like the Seer card in the Traitors, right? It sounded good in prospect, but it ruined the game. And those extra 20 balls, I think, are being badly missed in the 100. And there just hasn't been, through 4 seasons, I don't think there's been anywhere near enough competitive, compelling cricket. And that's the first thing that has to change. And if it does, I don't see why this league can't be a success, because it's got good players. The stands are generally full. So, yeah, maybe we're going to see the 100 coming up in the world.
I also, the other thought I had is, if you've got these kind of essentially private equity and more money coming in, I wonder if they're going to want to go for a slightly older audience as well, because when you're at the games, and I've been to quite a few, and I assume you have, isn't it, as well, Nick?
I haven't been to one yet.
Oh, have you not? Oh man, you are like, you're missing out. Like, it is quite an experience, and it's quite dramatically different from going to an international, like a full England, definitely red ball game, and even going to any kind of white ball game as well, right? Because the atmosphere is definitely pointed towards children, to try and get them in. It was a kind of, it was sold to the world as a bit of a loss leader, created by the ECB to get a younger audience in. But I wonder actually how difficult it is. A, that audience is quite transient because they grow up, and B, is it much more difficult to kind of monetize them in terms of, are they going to be repeat customers? And do they want to go make a product for kind of slightly older, late teens, early 20s type audience of people who've already bought into the game? I don't know. I think these are all questions that, if you're taking all this money off people, you got to fully expect them to bring to the table in terms of how they're going to position the league. You look at, Nick, I know you're a big Chelsea fan. You look at what Todd Bowley's done at Chelsea, and I feel, and I could be wrong here, but when he came in and kind of spent a hell of a lot of money buying players, people were laughing at him and at them. But actually, kind of this season, because they've kind of worked it out, and people are going, oh, actually, maybe the system works okay, it kind of feels like his vision is slightly more realised, and he looks like a kind of footballing genius, some would say.
Absolutely. He looked like a laughingstock for the first couple of years, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and slowly things seem to be coming together, and maybe the 100 can take a bit of inspiration from that. On your last point, Marky, I think it's really good that the 100 has been targeted towards kids, and that they're trying to engage with a younger audience, because cricket desperately needs that in the UK. The issue is that in trying to do that, they alienated their existing customer base and kind of tore up the whole English calendar, right? I think this idea that the only people who play 50 over cricket now are like kids and second team players is pretty absurd. And yeah, I mean, you hope that they can start to pull things together, start to find a slightly more cohesive structure, because I think all cricket fans, maybe apart from those very agenda-driven county fans who just will hate the 100, I think the majority of fans want to see the 100 succeed and want to have a good franchise league in England. But I mean, the sorry reality is at the moment that I've been more invested in leagues like the PSL or the SA20 over the past couple of years than I have the 100, and that just shouldn't be the case. So yeah, hopefully we're going to see a change in that.
Should we talk about the SA20? Because all the problems that the 100 has, the SA20 seems to not have had. And it's quite surprising because they kind of launched around the same time. I think this is the third season of SA20. We're about to, and at some point this year, we'll get the fourth season of the 100. The SA20 is a vibrant league with full packed stadia, and there seems to be a lot of buzz around it and a lot going on. Everyone seems to be quite happy. Nick, do you want to give us a little breakdown of what's going on in that league at the moment?
Yeah, man, the SA20 is amazing, isn't it? And I think it's worth mentioning before we get into the nitty gritty of it, that when it was announced and, South Africa had normally held tests during this time, that people were really sounding the death knell of South African cricket, right? And now, 3 seasons in, it looks alive and healthy. And there's a real strong pool of players, not just in white ball cricket, but in red ball cricket too. And I mean, they'll be in England for the World Test Championship final in 5-6 months' time. So yeah, South African cricket is alive and well, which I think is really good to see. And I mean, the big story from the league this year has to be the Pal Royals, right? And I mean, firstly, are they coached by Sanath Jayasuriya? Because they are following the Sri Lanka playbook. But I think the really big story is on the other side of things, this dynamic opening partnership between Luandre Pretorius, fresh out of diapers, and the old vet Joe Root, who'd been written off as a T20 player, but has played some remarkable innings. I mean, they're playing on a track that is very slow, very suited to spin. They bowled 20 overs of spin the other day. On Saturday, I think it was against the Pretoria Capitals, and Joe Root played a really, really masterful innings. All of a sudden, there are all kinds of calls for him to be reintegrated into England's T20 setup with the World Cup coming up in India and Sri Lanka, which I'm personally all on board with. But yeah, so Pal Royals are top of the league. We're getting towards the knockout stages. I think the teams have 1 to 2 matches left to play. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Everyone's still in with a shout, apart from the very bottom team who are, remind me, the Durban Super Giants, who, despite a strong-looking team on paper with, like the likes of De Kock, Klaassen, Mulder, captained by Maharaj, they've really flopped. I think they've only won 1 game. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how things progress into the knockout stages. I think especially because Pal Royals, who've probably looked the best side so far, are losing Joe Root after today. David Miller has also been suffering with a groin strain. And I mean, Root and Pretorius have been doing so much of the work up top that middle order still looks quite untested, quite unproven. DK hasn't batted much from number 5. But yeah, I mean, the big story, I guess, is Luandre Pretorius, and I wonder how long it's going to be before we see him in a South Africa shirt.
Well, you'd imagine that a lot of he'll be playing a lot more franchise cricket during the rest of this year. I want to talk about Joe Root for a minute, though, because I've often thought about Joe Root's career as actually being quite well. Obviously, he's first and foremost, he's an incredible player. He's an incredible batter, as all Sri Lanka fans know. And the thing that's always surprised me is his unwillingness almost to play more franchise cricket and more T20 cricket, only because that's absolutely where the money's at. And I kind of feel that, and maybe it's because I've basically lived a life where I've always been poor. And I don't understand, I've never had a central contract with the ECB, so I've never been guaranteed the kind of money he's guaranteed. But I kind of think he's getting to what he's approaching kind of mid-30s now, and maybe this is the moment where he's going to just go, right, I will be available for the Ashes, I'll be available for the India series, I'll be available for the Sri Lanka series, I'll be available for when the big 4 come. But for everything else, I've got to focus on the T20 cricket. I've got to be getting the big bags in the IPL. I've got to be trying to make a name for myself in this. And if he can play it for another 4 or 5 years, he can probably pick up another 3-4 million quid, which would help that retirement go a long, long way. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Nick.
Yeah, I think it's I think there are 2 sides of the coin. I think one is that he's really loved playing for England, and I'm sure he's very well recompensed by the ECB on his central contract. But I think the other is this sense that over the past 5 years, with 200 plus becoming the new normal, there was a sense that the game slightly moved away from him, and that he was a guy who couldn't strike at 150 plus, who couldn't necessarily go through the gears. But I think what we've seen in this tournament, and it's important to say that this tournament, the SA20 has been played out on wickets, which have generally offered a bit for bowlers. I think we've only seen 200 plus scores in 2 of the games. But I think when there's a little bit more for the bowlers in it, you need a slightly more conventional, traditional skill set. And Joe Root is a very classy player, one of the finest players of spin. And he's, on those tricky tracks where other batters have struggled, he's excelled. He's the leading run scorer. He's also been bowling 4 overs on a regular basis. So he's really contributed to that team. But I guess it's also important to pair him with the right kind of players. I think opening is the best slot for him. And LDP's been a perfect foil, right? Combative left-hander who's ready to go after it from ball one. That partnership's worked really, really well for me. And it was also a shout out to those guys who've been batting 3 and 4 for them, Ruben Herman and Mitchell van Buren, 2 domestic players who I guess international fans wouldn't be necessarily so familiar with, but 2 guys who've come in and really done a job and batted really well.
Joe Root, as you say, is going off to prepare for the Champions Trophy. They're drafting in Mitch Owen. Should we have a quick word on him, because he's having quite a week? Because he won the
Australia put Mitch Owen into their squad.
No, into Par Royals, right? To take.
Okay, I did not. Oh wow, that news has totally passed me by. Wow, that's great news.
I think Par Royals put it on their socials accounts a few hours ago. Sorry, I should have given you a heads up that I was going to bring that in.
News is always good.
He's having a heck of a week, though, isn't he?
Yeah. He sure is. I mean, that was an incredible 100 in the final of the Big Bash. I don't know if you saw, Marky, the picture of him in the stands at Hobart Hurricanes 10 years ago, and now here he is, smashing it. I guess parallels to Luandre Pretorius, in that a guy who not many people would have heard of outside of Tasmania cricket. I don't think he was particularly heralded coming into this tournament. I'm not sure if he's played in the age group cricket for Australia, but this is the first time I've heard his name. I was like, who? Michael Owen. I mean, he is a clean ball striker. When the ball's in his slot, he seems to love it full and straight. And I mean, he hits huge sixes. The ball pings off his bat. He's a big bloke. And as with LDP, I reckon it's not going to be long before we see these guys, this guy in an Australia shirt. And I think this is what's amazing about franchise cricket, right? Someone who no one's heard of a month ago is suddenly a star, the outstanding batter across the Big Bash. And franchise cricket has the ability to make these stars overnight in a way that domestic cricket didn't previously. And I think that's a really, really exciting thing for the game generally.
And also going back to the kind of bringing it back to the SA20, it's given an opportunity. If you look at LDP, like somebody who you just think, how is he pre SA20? How is he making a name for himself like this? He might not even get into the South Africa team in the next 3 or 4 months. They might want to have a more for look at him through another cycle of franchises. But he's got his name out there, and he can go away and kind of build his reputation, and make sure that he's kind of up there in front and center for selection, right? Which totally. I think only means, Oh, go on.
No, I think before this tournament, he played 1 first-class game, and I mean, he had a really good under-19 World Cup, but he was an unknown prospect, right? An unknown quantity, and now, I mean, he looks so mature at the crease. I saw Herschel Gibbs comparing him to Jesse Ryder, but I kind of see echoes of Graham Smith there. The stance, the sort of striking over cover. But you can tell that he's still raw. But I think you're right that franchise cricket has the ability to expedite these young players' careers. And you see guys coming out of nowhere. And I'm sure he'll be in demand for other leagues, whether there might be a late IPL contract for him. If someone drops out, you wouldn't put it past him. And because he fits the kind of modus operandi of that league, doesn't he? Going really hard from ball one.
Yeah, we'll be with you all the way through the IPL and beyond. So if you're a franchise fan, if you're a fan of T20 cricket, if you're a fan of what's going on in the world of cricket, make sure to hit the subscribe to the Cricket Smash channel on YouTube. We've got loads of content coming up over the next few days, weeks, months, years. Should we move on and talk about the ILT20? Sorry, no, we need to talk about one more thing, the SA20, before I move on. That is one of our favourite players, Patarana, who is having a bit of a he's in a bit of a moment, isn't he? But is there signs that he might be coming out of it and kind of coming out of his chrysalis and developing into that butterfly we all knew that he could be?
Yeah, I think there are. I just caught his first over today when we're recording, 30th of Jan. Oh, we're going live, so people know when we're recording. And
Yeah.
Mark Nicholas on comms said that he'd been bowling all morning. He was doing something new, coming round the wicket to right-handers. I think he looks visibly bulkier than he has done. You know, he was whippet thin in seasons past. You can tell he's been working in the gym and put on a bit of weight. I thought the arm was maybe coming back a little bit lower than it had been in those first few games. And yeah, I think Paterana is going to blossom. I mean, just before we leave the SA20, yeah, really looking forward to the knockouts. And I guess we'll be back to talk about them when they come. And I think what's good about this league is, as I touched on, Durban Super Giants right down at the bottom. You know, they've got Henrik Klaassen, they've got Quentin de Kock. Klaassen over the past 24 months has been a cheat code in T20 cricket. For a side, you know, bowling-wise, they've got Maharaj, they've got Noor Ahmed, they've got Naveen ul-Haq. So, I mean, for a team with that kind of quality to be bottom of the league, having one game, it says something about the standard. And I think, you know, going into these qualifiers and eliminators, it's anyone's game. I actually am fancying the Mumbai Indians, Cape Town, to take it, just because they've got the experience in their bowling lineup of, you know, Rashid Khan, Trent Bolt, and Kagiso Rabada. And at the top, they've got Rassi and Ryan Rickleton, who've been scoring runs. And given that I think Pal might be a little bit unsettled by, you know, Root leaving, Miller being out, I fancy Mumbai. But then who's to say, you know, I mean, Sunrisers Eastern Cape have been boom or bust, but JSK haven't, you know, been totally flying. But these teams have got the quality to beat anyone on their day. And I think that's what's really good about this league is, you know, sometimes in leagues you look at a team and think they look notably weaker than the other sides. But I feel that this has got that anyone can beat anyone kind of quality about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a well balanced league, and it's a league where young players can make a name for themselves. But I think the thing about kind of the way these leagues operate, though, is you've got to make sure timing in cricket is everything, right? So you don't want to go too early and get all your wins early on and then kind of be out of form. You got to make sure your players are in form just at the right time, right? And now we're getting to that kind of business end of the tournament. How often, you know, when we talk about the IPL, we talk about RCB look absolutely $1 million at the beginning of it, or even Rajasthan Royals look $1 million at the beginning of it. But when it comes to those clutch moments in games, it's never them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, that's.
And just on timing, Marky, one thing I would like to add is I really hate this thing that's happening in leagues at the moment where, like what we're seeing with Joe Root, where a player who has been influential for a team throughout the course of a season is whisked away for the finals. We've seen it in the ILT20 with players coming in and out. Like Tim David was in the Big Bash final a few days ago. Now he's in Dubai or wherever. And I am trying to make all cricket purists hate me by campaigning that this little period of January and I guess maybe the first 2 weeks of February is a franchise locked period. I think that if you sign up to a franchise league, you sign up to the whole of it. I can't stand players not being available for the finals when they've had an impactful season. And yeah, I really think that if we can make this and the IPL the only franchise only windows, that would be an improvement and would make things feel a bit more cohesive and a bit more organized.
You got to complete the story, right? Got to end the stories, like give it a conclusion. I also think, you know, players probably want that as well. They want to know where they are and what they're playing for. And I know they're seduced by money. I was reading about the Bangladesh Premier League, and they were talking about how I think David Warner might fly in and play like the last 2 games in the league, depending on what he's doing.
Like imagine if we had a Champions League final in football and they were like, Jude Bellingham's playing for England and Kylian Mbappe's playing for France, so they're not going to be here today. I mean, it's totally unfathomable.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say it, but it kind of ruins it. And it means that these tournament results have a heavy asterisk. And I mean, I think we want to see them as competitions. They shouldn't just be exhibition matches. And I think that the IPL branding is helping that. You know, India's got this culture of fanhood around the franchises. And, you know, you want it to mean something winning these tournaments, not to be like that these players are just here for a bash and to sell advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Should we move into the ILT20? Because that has many of the same problems. We talked about how good the SA20 was, and we talked about some of the problems of the 100. The ILT20 seems to kind of fall somewhere in between. It's an interesting league to watch, though, because there seems to be, at this point in time, at this point in the calendar, a very definite kind of gearing up of or pecking order of which league comes where when it comes to the foreign players. Seems to be the best players in the SA20. Then the ones who haven't got a contract in there end up in the ILT20, and then the ones who haven't got a contract in there and aren't Bangladeshi end up in the BPL, right? Have you been watching much of the ILT20? Have you been keeping abreast of it? In the UK, it's a pretty difficult thing to be able to watch. I think you've got to watch it on the Rakuten channel.
Yeah, I mean, that's a major problem to start with, right? You've got one of the biggest cricket markets in the world, and you haven't got a proper broadcast deal. So what's going on there? I mean, as a slight rejoinder to what you've said, Marky, I do think, yeah, that the SA20 does seem to have the cream of the crop, but we're seeing some really first-class players in the IL22. You know, guys like, I mean, especially the West Indians seem to love it. You've got Nicky Pooran there. You've got Shimron Hetmeyer. You've got Sunil Narain. There's Dre Russ. And I mean, I think the quality of the cricket on the whole has been pretty good. I don't think the UAE is a fantastic place to watch cricket. The wickets don't always seem to be great, and the stands are generally empty. So I think this league has been beset by a few problems. I mean, it must be losing money by the absolute bucket load. But there has been good cricket. There's been competitive cricket. I think, you know, it's at a similar stage to the SA20, a couple of games to play for most of the teams. And I think everyone is still in the running for the knockouts. We've seen, yes, some really good individual performances. Tom Banton is a guy who I would like to touch on, who I love these kind of stories where people's careers seem to come full circle, right? He was in the England setup in his early 20s. He was one of these guys who was predicted to be a next star. There were comparisons made to him, made between him and Kevin Peterson. And then he had a really, really lean few years. But now he seems to be finding his rhythm. I think he's probably, 25, 26 now. He's scored 200s, both off, you know, your sort of 50 balls, and looks to be batting really well in a powerful top order. Who is it? The Mumbai Emirates. I think another thing to touch on is that, you know, when this league started, the local Emirati players were kind of seen as being very much there to make up the numbers, shall we say. But I think we're starting to see lots of guys kind of actually make an impact. And there's one young left-arm spinner who I've been really impressed with, Ayan Afzal Khan, who is, he's 19. He's been bowling canny, stingy overs, going at less than sevens. We haven't seen much of his batting, but I hear he can slug a six as well. And you wonder whether he might develop into the UAE's first star.
I was really there's a couple of teams in here that I need to keep an eye on. Actually, almost all of them, because I find the makeup of the teams quite fascinating, and I definitely in the ILT20 more so than the SA20. I kind of get the impression that the IPL teams in the ILT20 are using it as a kind of place to have a look at players, see what they're capable of. I think there has been a case of players going ILT20, SA20, and then IPL. Though I need to kind of check that out. And I thought when you look at that Emirates squad, it's quite interesting with the players that they've got in it, because you're like, are these like, why are they here? Like, when they could just fill it up with a load of youngsters, and they've gone, they've got Purin in, who's obviously like, you know, one of the kind of gun players in the world. So you definitely pick him. Faruqi is the kind of Afghan Seamer. He's been around for a few years now, and actually he's impressed me for quite a long time. He's really consistent. I think he got an IPL contract. I think he was somebody who was brought in a couple of years ago, but now you're like, well, he's been around a while. He's really kind of picked his game up. He's learnt his game, and he's the top wicket taker in the league at the moment. So yeah, I think this is, if you're a young player looking to, you know, we talked about South Africans in the SA20. We talked about the opportunity as Australians having in the Big Bash. If you're a young player from a kind of slightly unfashionable cricket nation, then I think you want to try and get yourself an ILT20 contract, because this is a place where you know, people might not be in the stands watching it, but the people you need to watch it, the people who could take you to the next level, are definitely there watching it, right? And definitely seeing what performances people put in. I think, you know, if you're watching this and don't know it, me and Nick follow Sri Lanka very closely, and I think there's about 12 Sri Lankans in this league, which is great from a kind of Sri Lankan white ball perspective. But there's players in this league who me and Nick had almost forgotten play T20 cricket, right? Or having a renaissance.
I mean, KJP is case in point, right? Who's been doing really well for who is it? MIAE.
Emirates, yeah.
Yeah, another guy who I'd touch on there, Marky, from as a potential bolter from an unfashionable nation is Mark Adair, who has been bowling really well. You know, you talk about Irish seam bowling and everyone goes to Josh Little, but this is another guy who's impressed and who could be in line for contracts. But yeah, some of the teams are, I guess, just unusual, right? I was looking at Abu Dhabi Knight Riders, and they've got like half the West Indies side. They've got Kyle Mayers, they've got Russell, Holder, Narayan, Chase, and I think their leading run scorer is a young Emirati batter, Arishan Sharafu. So, I mean, there's all sorts going on in this league. It's, again, like I say about the 100, it's a kind of diamond in the rough, isn't it? A suitable Aladdin reference. UAE. Like, I feel like it could be really good, but it's just, I mean, it being on English telly would be a useful start.
I think there's value in having a league that isn't totally reliant on homegrown domestically produced players, right? So the fact that you can have so many foreign players in it and actually can be an advantage, but it's like they've never really fully realized it. I'd say it's like the league's like 95% loaded. Or rented.
I mean, you imagine that guarantees a higher standard of cricket, because like 80% of your players, or not quite, is it 3 locals that they have per side? But the large majority of your players are, you know, franchise guns for hire who are, if not international standard, they're not a million miles away from it. So the quality of cricket is good. And yeah, I think it's just a shame that there aren't more eyes on the league. We've had this conversation of like, who's it actually for and who is watching it. And I mean, I imagine it's fine to be a loss leader for a little while, but it's into its 3rd season now. And you would have thought that as a league, it has to start being financially viable for it to continue existing.
Yeah, and you'd imagine that's going to happen sooner rather than later. The cat's not a fan of it either.
He doesn't like it either. Although, he doesn't like any of them. He's an IPL man.
Yeah. Sure. I want to talk about BPL. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, though. You can watch it if you want. It is free to watch on YouTube. So there's been a problem, which actually it turns out is quite a big problem in franchise cricket, and that's players and other people associated with cricket teams and working for cricket teams not getting paid. So I had heard that all the foreign players had left, but this isn't actually quite true. So Durba Rajshahi is a team name. I'm sorry, my Bengali is terrible. So I don't know if I probably mispronounced that. And apparently none of their players were getting paid. So all the foreign players just said, we're not playing until we're paid and show us the money for their side. So last week they had to field a team of domestic players. And I think there was a protest and all sorts. The Bangladeshi government have got involved and put a committee together to investigate it, because they're saying it's not good for the reputation of the country, a reputation of cricket in Bangladesh. I'd agree that it isn't good, that people aren't getting paid. If you're going to say you're going to pay people, pay them. It doesn't, I have spoken to some players who are currently contracted and playing in the league, and it basically just said, have you got paid? Because I was first alerted to the story, but then put it on their Instagram talking about it. And it turns out that the team that these foreign players play for other sides have got paid. But it's interesting how just one bad egg, one bad team here can kind of tarnish the whole league, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, it is. And I think there's, even before this payment scandal, there's perhaps a wider perception that the BPL is slightly going backwards as a league. I mean, it used to have, I guess, more of a free hit before the SA20 and the ILT20 came into existence in the same window, challenging it for players. But I mean, yeah, just from a kind of player base, you look at the overseas names in there, and it's not the most illustrious, is it? I think even last year there were a lot more names who I was interested in, and I was following it kind of more closely. Whereas I've got to say this year, it's kind of drifted off my radar.
Yeah, and also the problem they've got is that players, it's that thing we talked about earlier. So players are coming from the beginning off it, and then the minute the SA20 or the ILT20 starts, they're going off to the UAE or to South Africa and playing in those leagues, because they get paid more money and presumably kind of less nervous about actually getting paid. So yeah, it kind of feels like it's been now reduced to kind of aging stars, or in some cases brothers of stars.
And yeah, I mean, I'm just having a look through the leading run scorers and wicket takers, and there really, I mean, aren't a lot of overseas players in that list. It's largely Bangladeshi players. So you're kind of looking at a league which almost isn't even a franchise league. It's more like a domestic league, which is going to struggle to capture hearts and minds and eyeballs, given the amount of cricket ongoing alongside it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Though what I've heard is that, Bangladesh is a fairly robust cricket market, and there is actually a lot of love for this league in Bangladesh. So yeah, maybe they feel they don't need to look outside it. I mean, you probably only need to sell it to just get Indian contract for it, and it should work.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, Bangladesh is a country with 200 million population, so there's a plenty large enough domestic market for it. And look at the LPL, which we love, but I imagine not a lot of other people outside of Sri Lanka are that invested in. But it's nonetheless, it's been a real boost for the Sri Lankan game, because you're getting players playing in pressure situations against good opposition. So yeah, not all franchise leagues necessarily have to be, directed towards the international market to be successful. So maybe perhaps this is still doing good things for Bangladesh cricket, even though we're not too invested in it.
Nick, is there anything else left that we need to talk about? I think we're just about done for this episode of The Big Bag.
Yeah, we touched on Mitch Owen, and I guess just a little quick word on the Big Bash. I didn't watch all of it, but it seems to me a bit of to be having a bit of a resurgence. Well, what I did see of it, I really enjoyed. There were young players thriving alongside Mitch Owen. Cooper Connolly did really well. Lloyd Pope was bowling nicely. The Ginger Warren, who is now no longer Ginger, he's actually bald. And at the other end of the spectrum, Peter Siddle, who just seems to be evergreen at about 58, still taking wickets. So, yeah, I enjoyed the Big Bash this year. Glad to see it back to some extent, although I still think it's too long.
Yeah, so like, I do love the Big Bash, and really my love for it is because I've got a lot of family in Australia, and my wife's Australian, and I spend a lot of time in Australia typically around Christmas time. Not a lot, 2 weeks. And I love it because every house I seem to go to, and obviously, you know, my family have a cricket bias, is they've got the Big Bash on. It's all free to wear, and it's on every evening, and all the family and kids are watching it, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's brilliant to get the kids in. It's everything. It's almost kind of everything they thought the 100 would be. It's taken them a while to figure out, I think, what the Big Bash's kind of position in life is, but they've kind of figured it out. And then you couple that up with all the Test cricket that, you know, Australia's whole Test summer this year is free to air on Channel 7 as well. And it's like, right, so you've got the Test match on during the day, and then that finishes kind of 5-6 o'clock, and then kind of a couple of hours later the Big Bash restarts, and you know it's just all day cricket in a lot of Australian households. So you can see how that's propagating the game and also getting a whole new generation of kids into playing it and into watching it, which is so important for the game, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. Another thing that Australia are getting right, and yeah, I think just to round up, Marky, I feel like across the leagues over the past couple of months, we've seen some of the best of franchise cricket and what franchise cricket can do and why it can be a positive force for the game outside of just being entertaining to watch. And so I think that's really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, with a big bag, we'll be back next week. I think we'll do around the same time on Thursday. So hit subscribe and follow us on socials and get involved in the conversation next time. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.